The chamber of the Interstellar Council was built to impress. It was wide, tall, and filled with light that came from no single star. Smooth walls curved upward like the inside of a shell, and floating platforms held the seats of each delegation. Every sound echoed just enough to remind those inside that this place was meant for power, judgment, and memory. The human delegation from the United States arrived without ceremony. No banners followed them. No armed guards stood at their backs. They took their seats in silence, as they always did. Some council members noticed. Most did not care. Jay stood slightly behind the main table, his hands folded in front of him. He was not the ambassador. He was an aide, a listener, and a note keeper. His job was to watch faces, record words, and remember what others wished forgotten. His dark jacket was plain, marked only with a small US a symbol near the collar. Across the chamber, voices rose and fell as the session came to order. The topic had already been decided before anyone sat down. A human research convoy had crossed a disputed region of space weeks earlier. An incident followed. A foreign patrol was damaged. No humans were harmed. No clear recordings were shared, yet the blame had found its target. Era sat 2 seats to Jay's left, her eyes fixed on a thin screen hovering above the table. Lines of data scrolled past her vision. She had reviewed the evidence many times already. It was incomplete. Timelines were broken. Key sensor logs were missing. She knew why. When the presiding voice called for statements, one delegation after another spoke with practiced concern. Words like stability, order, and collective safety filled the air. Each speaker repeated the same idea in a different tone. Humanity had acted without care. Humanity had pushed too far. Humanity needed to be corrected. Jay wrote everything down. He did not interrupt. He did not frown. Only once did his jaw tighten, and even that passed quickly. The human ambassador was given the floor last. He stood, thanked the council for its time, and spoke calmly. He explained the convoy's purpose. He offered to share full logs, crew testimony, and navigation data. He asked, once, for an independent review. The request was ignored. Era felt her fingers curl slightly against the table. She forced them to relax. She knew this moment had been coming long before the vote. The patterns were too familiar. The pauses. The careful refusal to look at human data. The decision was read aloud. The Interstellar Council formally censured the United States of America for reckless action. Trade privileges would be reviewed. Joint operations would be suspended. Human military presence near Council space would be restricted. The words echoed through the chamber. There was a pause. Many delegates leaned forward, waiting. They expected anger. They expected protest. They expected humanity to remind the Council of its fleets, its technology, its past sacrifices. None of that came. The ambassador nodded once. He thanked the Council for its judgment. He said the United States would comply with the ruling. That was all. A ripple of confusion spread through the chamber. Jay felt it like a change in pressure. He saw it in the way heads tilted and eyes narrowed. This was not the reaction they had planned for. When the session ended, conversations broke out at once. Some delegates laughed quietly. Others whispered. A few looked uneasy, though they could not yet say why. The human delegation stood and left together. No one stopped them. Outside the chamber, the corridor was long and silent. The lights dimmed slightly as the humans passed, responding to movement and nothing else. Era let out a slow breath she had been holding since the vote was announced. They never intended to review the data, she said softly. Jay nodded. No. Ahead of them, the ambassador paused and turned. His face showed no anger, only weariness. We proceed, he said. As planned. Those 2 words carried more weight than any speech inside the chamber. Hours later, Across human-controlled space, quiet messages were sent. Tay received his orders while standing on the bridge of a patrol carrier. The ship drifted near a trade route that had been peaceful for years. He read the message once, then again. To be sure, begin phase withdrawal. No delays, no statements. He looked out at the stars. He had commanded logistics for half his career. He knew how rare such clean orders were. No emotion, no argument, just action. Yes, he said, and passed the command along. Ships changed course. Fleets that had guarded convoys for decades turned away from council borders. Supply stations powered down non-essential systems. Human presence faded not in chaos, but in perfect order. Nari watched from a communication center on a distant station. Her task was different. She sent messages, not commands. Short, polite notices went out to former partners. Thank you for working with us. We wish you safety and success. She did not explain more. She was told not to. Back on Earth, Hyan stood in a quiet room filled with screens. Data flowed across them, showing patterns only he and a few others truly understood. Conflict rates, trade stability, piracy incidents. He marked the moment of the council vote. Then he projected forward. The models responded instantly. Lines shifted. Colors changed. Hyan exhaled slowly. Human involvement had been holding more together than the council ever admitted. Dami. Read the same reports days later from a humanitarian office near the inner colonies. She saw where aid routes would be cut, where support would end. She also saw new allocations. Resources returning home. Systems strengthening inward. Humanity was not collapsing. It was stepping back. In the council chambers, the mood remained confident. The vote was celebrated quietly. The idea spread that humans had finally learned restraint. That pressure had worked. Only a few noticed the silence growing at the edges of their maps. Jay returned to his quarters and filed his final notes. He saved copies in 3 secure locations. Then he sat down and waited. He knew this story was only beginning. And he knew. As the lights dimmed and distant stars shifted beyond the window, that the council had mistaken quiet for weakness. They would learn the difference. The retreat did not begin with alarms or public announcements. There were no broadcasts to warn the galaxy. There was only movement, steady and quiet, like a tide pulling back from the shore. Tay stood on the bridge as the carrier shifted its heading away from the trade lane. The stars ahead changed slowly, almost politely. Officers spoke in low voices. Commands were short and clear. Every crew member already knew what to do. They had trained for this kind of withdrawal many times, though no one had believed it would ever be used. The carrier was not alone. On Tay's display, other human ships followed the same pattern. Escorts detached from convoys. Patrol craft powered down long-range sensors. Supply ships altered routes that had been fixed for decades. No. One asked why. Tay thought about the merchants who would notice first. They would wonder where the familiar human ships had gone. At first, they would assume a delay. Humans were always reliable. They would wait. Then they would realize the truth. On a distant station near the council border, Nari finished sending her final message. Her screen showed confirmation after confirmation. Every partner contact acknowledged receipt. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. Her work had always been about connection. She spoke for humans who never appeared on official records, engineers, medics, pilots, who fixed problems before anyone noticed them. Now, she was saying goodbye without explaining why. A junior officer nearby hesitated. Should we send a longer notice? He asked. Nari shook her head gently. No, we were clear. We were polite. That is enough. The station's docking bay lights dimmed as the last human transport departed. Automated systems took over. maintaining only what was required by treaty. Everything else went dark, across several systems. The same pattern repeated. In places where humans had once walked openly, their presence faded. Research teams packed equipment and left clean rooms behind. Advisors quietly ended contracts. Shared command centers transferred full control to local authorities. There were no arguments. Humans followed every rule the council had written. At first, the council felt pleased. Reports flowed into their chambers showing compliance rates. No resistance. No protests. Trade sanctions appeared effective. Some delegates congratulated one another on restoring balance, but small problems began to appear. A cargo ship was attacked on an outer route. The local patrol arrived too late. The pirates escaped. A border dispute flared between two minor powers. The talks stalled without a neutral human mediator. Voices grew sharp. Weapons were powered on. These were noted as isolated events. Hyan watched the same reports from his quiet room. He marked each incident carefully. He compared them to older records. The difference was clear. Where humans had once been present, trouble had stayed small. Now it grew faster. He sent summaries upward through secure channels. He did not add emotion. The numbers spoke well enough. On Earth, Dami oversaw the redirection of aid shipments. Medical supplies once sent outward were reassigned to frontier colonies closer to home. Construction units began work on long-delayed infrastructure projects. The mood among her teams was strange. There was relief, but also concern. "We are not abandoning people," one worker said quietly. "No," Dami replied. "We are choosing where we stand." She believed it. Still, she knew others would suffer. Jay followed events from a distance. His role had changed. He was no longer part of negotiations. He was an observer again, just as he had been early in his career. He attended council session. As only when required. He spoke only when asked directly. The council noticed this absence more than they expected. During one session, a delegate paused mid-speech, searching the human seats. "They are fully withdrawn from this committee?" The delegate asked. "Yes," the presiding voice replied, "in accordance with our ruling." The session continued, but the rhythm was off. Debates dragged longer. Decisions were delayed. Humans had once done much of the quiet work. Drafting compromises, fixing language, finding paths everyone could accept. Now the work was gone. In the outer systems, merchants began to complain. Insurance rates rose. Travel times increased as ships avoided unsafe routes. Some companies petitioned the council for protection. The council issued statements. They promised reviews. They promised action. Nothing changed. Tay's carrier completed its final disengagement and jumped back toward human space. As the star stretched and vanished, he allowed himself a long breath. He did not feel defeat. He felt focus. Back in secure territory, human fleets reorganized. Patrols tightened around core systems. Training schedules increased. New defensive nets came online. The retreat had freed resources. Humans used them. Nari transferred to a home station and began work with returning civilians. Scientists and technicians arrived daily, carrying stories they were not yet ready to tell. Some were angry. Most were thoughtful. They didn't even listen. One engineer said, "Nar," I nodded. "I know." On a far trade route, another convoy was attacked. This time, the loss was heavy. The council called an emergency meeting. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Someone mentioned humans. The room fell quiet. "They chose to leave," a delegate said sharply. "We did not ask them to go." No one answered. Hyan watched the recording later. He paused it on that moment. He highlighted the silence. Silence could say many things. Days turned into weeks. The maps kept changing. Instability spread outward like cracks in glass. And still, the humans did not return. They did not threaten. They did not remind the council of past favors. They waited. Far from the noise, Jay stood at a window and looked out at the stars. He thought about history, about how often humans had stepped forward when others stepped back. This time was different. This time, they had chosen to let the galaxy feel the weight of its own decisions. And somewhere beyond council space, human ships held their course, quiet and ready, proving that retreat was not the same as surrender. The problems no longer stayed small. At first, the council tried to treat each new crisis as a separate matter. A failed trade route here, a border clash there. Committees were formed. Reports were requested. Speeches were made. But the gaps left by the humans were too wide. On a shipping lane once guarded by human patrols, 3 cargo vessels vanished in a single week. Their last signals were weak and confused. When local forces arrived, they found debris and nothing else. Insurance companies raised their prices again. Some refused to cover certain routes at all. Merchants complained loudly. The council listened, but answers were slow. Hyan tracked every incident. His screens were filled with maps marked in red and yellow. He compared present data to older years. The difference was not subtle. Where humans had once maintained calm through presence alone, chaos now moved freely. He prepared a report and sent it to multiple council offices, using open channels this time. He made sure it contained only facts. No blame, no judgment. The response was silence. On Earth, Gami watched the same news from a different angle. Refugee numbers were rising in border systems once protected by human aid routes. Requests for help arrived daily. She approved what she could, but the orders were clear. Aid beyond certain lines required council approval. That approval did not come. Dami stood in a storage bay filled with supplies and felt the weight of it pressing on her chest. These crates would once have been loaded onto ships within hours. Now, they stayed where they were. Tay trained his crews harder than before. Simulations ran day and night. Scenarios grew more complex. Some involved threats that no longer existed. Others involved threats that soon might. He watched young officers learn restraint, learn patience. This is not weakness, he told them. This is discipline. They listened. In council space, discipline was harder to find. A mediation effort between 2 rival powers failed when neither side trusted the other's words. There was no neutral human presence to keep tempers low. Shots were fired. The conflict spread. The council called for calm. The call went unanswered. Jay attended another session as an observer. He sat in the same seat as before, hands folded, expression calm. Delegates spoke over one another. Accusations flew freely now. Someone mentioned that humans used to help prevent this. Another voice snapped back. They chose to leave. Jay did not react. He wrote it down. After the session, a junior delegate approached him quietly. Was it always this fragile? The delegate asked. Jay considered the question. No, he said. It was supported. The delegate frowned but said nothing more. Weeks passed. Council resources stretched thin. Fleets redeployed again and again, never enough to cover every problem. Supplies arrived late. Orders conflicted. Trust eroded. In the absence of humans, old grudges resurfaced. Old fears returned. Hyam updated his projections. The models now showed cascading failure. He highlighted the point of no easy return. It was closer than before. He sent the update. Still no response. On a remote colony near human space, Nari met with families who had returned early from council regions. They spoke of fear, of roads no longer safe, of promises that had meant nothing. Nari listened. She did not defend the Venda Council. She did not criticize it either. She helped people settle. The human core systems grew stronger by the day. Infrastructure improved. Defensive nets expanded. New research projects began, funded by resources once spent. Elsewhere, humanity adapted quickly. That adaptability was noticed. Council analysts began to realize something uncomfortable. The humans were not suffering. They were stabilizing. Meanwhile, council space continued to strain. A major trade hub shut down after repeated attacks. Entire economies felt the shock. Emergency meetings became routine. At one such meeting, a senior delegate finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. What if we were wrong? The room went still. Some scoffed. Others looked away. The presiding voice did not answer. Outside official channels, private messages began to circulate. Some council members contacted human offices quietly, asking for advice. The replies were polite. Non-committal. Humans did not offer help without invitation. An invitation required accountability. Read one such message late at night. He forwarded it upward without comment. On Earth, the response was discussed carefully. No decision was made. The council had not apologized. The council had not admitted fault. The galaxy continued to feel the cost. Tay watched a briefing showing a nearby conflict zone. His fleet could reach it in hours. The order did not come. He understood why. Power without trust fixed nothing. Heinz single quotes as latest report finally triggered discussion. A closed-door meeting was scheduled. Humans were not invited. Inside, council members reviewed years of records. They saw patterns they had ignored. Missions humans had funded alone. Risks humans had absorbed quietly. No one spoke for a long time. The truth was uncomfortable. The silence stretched, and still, beyond their borders, human ships held position. Engines warm. Crews ready. They did not advance. They did not retreat further. They waited. The galaxy was learning, slowly and painfully, what the humans had once given freely, and the council was beginning to understand that judgment, once spoken, could not be taken back without consequence. The emergency session was called without ceremony. Council members arrived tired and tense. Their voices were lower than before. The confidence that once filled the chamber had faded, replaced by strain and quiet fear. The screens around the chamber showed maps covered in warnings. Trade lanes marked unsafe. Borders flashing with alerts. Systems once calm, now listed as unstable. The presiding voice opened the session and spoke. The truth no one could deny anymore. The situation is deteriorating. No one argued. One by one, delegates spoke. Not with speeches this time, but with reports. Losses were counted. Failures admitted. Each voice added weight. To the same conclusion, the galaxy was breaking. Apart at the edges, someone finally said the word that had been avoided for months. Humans. The chamber went still. Senior delegates stood slowly. We must review our actions, they said. All of them. Records were opened. Archives once ignored were displayed for all to see. Mission logs. Funding trails. Security reports. The pattern became clear. Humans have been present at nearly every point of stability. Often without credit. Often without command. They had absorbed losses quietly. Covered gaps others could not or would not fill. And when judged unfairly, they had stepped away. Jay sat in the observer section, invited only because protocol required a human presence. He did not speak. He watched. Era sat beside him, her eyes scanning the data. She felt a tightness in her chest. Not pride. Not anger. Recognition. The council saw it now. The question was what they would do with that knowledge. A motion was raised. Request the return of human support. The words hung in the air. Debate followed. Quieter than past arguments. Some delegates insisted the council must not appear weak. Others argued that pride had already cost too much. Vote was called. It passed, but the language mattered. The request was formal, polite. It was not an apology. J. Notice that detail immediately. After the session, a small girl approached the human observers. Their faces showed discomfort. "We hope," one delegate said carefully, "that past misunderstandings can be set aside." Jay met their gaze. "Understanding requires clarity," he replied. "Clarity requires honesty." The delegate nodded but did not respond. The request was transmitted to human space. On Earth, leaders gathered to review it. Tay attended remotely, still in uniform. Hyan stood near the data wall. Dami joined from a humanitarian center. The message was read aloud. Silence followed. "It asks for help," Dami said. "But it does not accept responsibility." Hyan nodded. The patterns would repeat. Tay folded his arms. Our people would pay the cost again. The decision was unanimous. No immediate return. Reply was drafted. It was calm, respectful. It stated conditions. Accountability. Transparency. Equal partnership. Until then, humanity would remain withdrawn. The message was sent. The council received it in silence. Some reacted with anger, others with shame. The galaxy did not pause while debates continued. A major system declared emergency status after its defenses failed. Refugees flooded neighboring regions. The council scrambled to respond. Without human logistics. The response was slow. Too slow. NAR. I watched the reports and felt the familiar pull to act. Her hands tightened at her sides. "They will ask again," she said quietly. "Yes," Era replied. "And next time, it must be different." In the council chamber, a second emergency session was called. This time, the tone was different. Delegates spoke of responsibility, of failure, of lessons learned. A proposal was raised. A public acknowledgement of error. It faced resistance, but resistance was weaker now. The vote passed by a narrow margin. The council prepared a broadcast across known space. The message spread. The council admitted its judgment had been flawed. It acknowledged the harm caused by ignoring evidence. It accepted responsibility for the consequences. It was not perfect, but it was real. J watched the broadcast from a quiet room. He felt no triumph, only readiness. The message reached Earth. Human leaders listened carefully. "This is the first step," Dami said. Hyan reviewed the language. "It is measurable." Tay nodded once. "Then we respond." A new message was prepared. It did not promise immediate action. It acknowledged the apology. It stated that trust would take time. Human ships would not cross borders yet, but dialogue would reopen. The council received the reply. For the first time since the vote, hope stirred. Not relief. Hope. Beyond the borders, human fleets adjusted formation slightly. Not forward, but closer. Engines remained idle. The galaxy held its breath. Quietly, the balance began to shift not through force, but through truth finally spoken. The reply from human leadership reached the council quietly, like a gentle signal among the chaos. It was not a promise of fleets or weapons. It was a statement of principle. Era read the words aloud in the secure chamber on Earth. Jay sat beside her, hands folded, listening carefully. "We do not return to punish. We return only where we are invited as equals," the message stated. "We will act with transparency, accountability, and mutual respect. Until these conditions are met, humanity remains withdrawn." Tay leaned back in his chair. His eyes scanned the display of human ships in orbit around the inner colonies. The engines were ready, but the ships remained idle. Quiet, disciplined, waiting. Hyan adjusted the data projections. The council's response had already begun to shift. Some members showed relief, some pride, some fear. They now understood the consequences of their previous judgment. The council gathered in their main chamber once more. This time, the mood was different. The delegates spoke carefully. Some apologized publicly. Some accepted responsibility. A few still resisted, but they were fewer. The broadcast reached distant systems, showing the council's acknowledgement of past mistakes. Everywhere, people noticed the change. Traders, mediators, local leaders all felt the weight of human absence slowly lift as the acknowledgement spread. Jay observed quietly. He noted the subtle gestures, the small acknowledgements, the hesitant but real shift. He did not smile. There was no need. The humans had already said what needed to be said. Dami prepared the next steps. Aid would move into the regions where trust had been rebuilt. Supply routes reopened carefully. Human advisors remained close, but only where the council had shown genuine intent to cooperate. Nari sent polite communications to former partners, thanking them for their patience. She made sure that every message carried the same tone, respectful, firm, clear. Tay oversaw exercises to ensure that fleets were ready to move at a moment's notice. But they would only move with agreement. Discipline was maintained, not broken. In the council, debates continued. Some delegates tried to assert authority too quickly, hoping humans would act regardless. But the response from Earth remained consistent. No action without invitation. No compromise of principle. Hyan observed the data with satisfaction. Systems previously under strain began to stabilize. Trade routes reopened slowly, but securely. Conflicts began to resolve as mediators returned under new agreements. And yet, the council could feel the quiet tension. Humanity's decision to remain cautious weighed heavily. It was a reminder that power alone did not grant trust. Respect had to be earned. In a distant observation deck, Jay watched human ships drift silently. Eris stood beside him. "They know," Eris said quietly. "They know the galaxy watched them and learned." Jay nodded. And the council learned too. Slowly, painfully. The first invitation to return arrived weeks later. It was measured, careful. The council asked for human assistance in mediating a trade dispute. They acknowledged past errors and pledged transparency. The response from Earth was equally measured. Humans would participate, but on terms that ensured equality and accountability. Fleets would not intervene without reason. Aid would flow where it was truly needed. Mediation would be fair and clear. Ships moved again, but not as conquerors. Not as enforcers. They moved as humans had always moved, quietly, deliberately, with precision and purpose. Their presence restored stability, not fear. Their restraint became their strength. Tay watched the first convoy arrive safely. No fanfare. No speeches. Only careful coordination, efficiency, and reassurance. Nari met with local leaders, smiling politely. She facilitated agreements, guided discussions, and ensured the process remained transparent. Hyan tracked the data. Trade volumes returned to normal. Conflicts resolved without escalation. Human influence spread quietly, but powerfully. The council watched, learning. They realized that the humans had not left out of weakness. They had left to teach a lesson in patience, responsibility, and humility. And now, they had returned on their own terms, showing that strength was not only in might, but in principle. Jay stood on the observation deck, looking at the stars. He felt the calm pride of those who had waited, who had planned, who had acted wisely. He knew the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. Era joined him, her eyes following the paths of human ships. "They came back," she said. "Yes," Jay replied. "But only when it mattered, and only as themselves." The final lesson had been delivered quietly. The galaxy would remember it. And humanity, calm and resolute, held its place not as rulers, not as aggressors, but as equals who demanded fairness, honesty, and respect. Their retreat had not been surrender. It had been teaching. And now they were back, not to dominate, but to guide where guidance was earned. The Council had answers to give. The systems had stability restored. The human fleets remained vigilant, engines ready, but idle, waiting for the next invitation. Quietly, deliberately, the galaxy moved forward under the watch of humans who had once left, and had now returned on their own terms. Months had passed since humanity returned to the border systems, and the galaxy had begun to adjust to their measured presence. Ships moved with caution, convoys were secure, and trade slowly returned to stable levels. But this calm did not mean peace was complete. Jay watched the display in a quiet observation room. Maps showed new tensions forming along minor borders that had been ignored for years. Systems that once relied on human oversight were still adjusting, and old rivalries stirred. Despite the humans' return, the Council had not yet internalized the lessons fully. Era stood beside him, scanning reports. "Some systems are testing boundaries again," she said. "They think humans will intervene because they are back." Jay shook his head slowly. "Humans act on principle, not assumption. They will intervene only where invited and needed." Meanwhile, Tay oversaw fleet maneuvers near the frontier. Ships glided silently through the void, maintaining defensive formations. Every crew member knew the rules. Act decisively when invited, but do not overstep. It was a delicate balance, and Tay's calm guidance ensured the young officers understood that restraint could be as powerful as aggression. In one distant system, a minor skirmish had begun. Two factions disputed a resource-rich planet, sending armed ships to patrol contested orbits. Local mediators tried to broker peace, but were ignored. Communications were intercepted, and tension rose. The Council debated sending ships, but the human fleet's presence gave them pause. No human commander would act without formal invitation. That knowledge restrained rash decisions and prevented escalation. Hyan observed the situation from Earth. His screen showed the movements of both human and Council ships, as well as civilian transports. He tracked every potential escalation point, analyzing patterns and predicting outcomes. He noted that where humans acted as mediators, conflict decreased by over 70%. Where humans remained inactive due to principle, the Council had to exercise real caution. Gami coordinated humanitarian support. Refugees from the contested planet had begun fleeing towards safe zones. Aid shipments were delayed because the Council had yet to acknowledge the scale of displacement. Dami's teams worked tirelessly, arranging shelters, food, and medical care. While respecting the system's sovereignty, the Council finally sent a formal invitation to the human fleet, requesting assistance in negotiation and security. Jay reviewed the transmission. The language was careful, precise, and humble. The Council recognized past errors and offered full transparency. Era nodded. "They are learning," she said. Slowly, Tay received orders to move the fleet into designated holding positions near the conflict. Engines ignited and ships aligned into formation. There was no rush, no display of power, just careful preparation. The human presence was meant to stabilize, not intimidate. As the fleet approached, emissaries from the conflicting factions met with human officers. Nari facilitated discussions, emphasizing fairness and adherence to principle. The emissaries were surprised by the humans' neutrality and the patience they displayed. Arguments that had escalated into threats hours earlier began to calm. Through dialogue, a compromise was drafted. Resource access would be shared temporarily under human supervision. Both factions were required to report openly on activities and communications. The human fleet's observation ensured that neither side acted in bad faith. Back in Earth orbit, Jay and Era monitored the negotiations. They noted subtle shifts in behavior. Leaders were cautious, aware that any deceit would be observed. The human's quiet authority had a powerful effect without a single shot being fired. Hyon updated predictive models. The chance of full-scale conflict had dropped significantly. Data showed that the Council itself was learning to act more responsibly, guided indirectly by human restraint and the threat of withdrawal. Systems were stabilizing not through dominance, but through respect for human principles. Weeks later, the skirmish ended peacefully. Both factions publicly acknowledged the human role and expressed gratitude for their impartial mediation. Trade routes reopened, and displaced civilians returned safely. The Council documented the outcome, albeit cautiously, understanding that public praise could not erase prior mistakes, but could foster a new path forward. Throughout the galaxy, other systems observed the human approach. Their restraint, patience, and emphasis on fairness became a model. Conflicts that might have erupted into war were reconsidered. Leaders hesitated before acting rashly, knowing that principle-driven intervention would expose dishonesty and inequity. Jay stood once more on the observation deck, looking at the stars. Era joined him, quietly reflecting on the month's events. "They're changing more than just the Council," Era said. "Even the smaller systems are learning from this. They watch, they adapt, they reconsider." Jay nodded. "The lesson is subtle but real. Humanity's strength lies in restraint, not force. It shapes behavior without needing to dominate." In the quiet of space, the human fleet remained ready. Engines were warm, crews prepared for action, but they moved only when needed, only when invited, and always with principle as their guide. They had returned not as conquerors or enforcers, but as stewards of fairness, demonstrating that true power lies in patience, discipline, and moral clarity. And as the galaxy slowly adjusted to this quiet presence, the Council, the factions, and even distant observers understood that the humans' retreat and measured return had been a lesson in leadership and restraint, a lesson that would echo for generations. The galaxy had entered a new rhythm. Human ships moved quietly along established routes, their presence both reassuring and a reminder of the principles that guided them. Systems that had once relied heavily on the Council now understood that fairness and discipline were key to stability. Jay observed the movements from a high-orbit observation station. Era stood beside him, watching as convoys and fleets coordinated with precise timing. Each movement was calculated, deliberate, and calm. There were no displays of power, no unnecessary maneuvers, only efficiency and restraint. "They are teaching by example," Era said quietly. "Not through threats or dominance, but by showing how things should be done." Jay nodded. "Every action carries a lesson. Even their inaction teaches restraint." Tay oversaw fleet exercises near a contested border. Young officers practiced coordination under realistic conditions, but they were always reminded, act only when invited, act fairly, act with principle. The lessons were clear, and the crews understood the importance of moral authority as much as military readiness. In a nearby system, a dispute arose between two planets over a minor resource exchange. Local negotiators failed to prevent heated arguments, and tensions grew. The Council considered sending a response fleet, but hesitated, mindful of previous lessons learned from human withdrawal. Instead, a measured request for human mediation was sent. Nari received the communication and reviewed the situation. The Council had admitted errors, and the parties requesting assistance showed willingness to cooperate. She arranged for a small delegation of human officers and advisors to assist in mediation. Arriving at the system, the humans approached without fanfare. They were not military conquerors. They were facilitators, observers, and guides. Their presence alone was calming. Leaders on both sides adjusted their tone, aware that any false move would be noted. Negotiations began. Each step was transparent. Proposals were carefully considered, and agreements were recorded. No side could claim unfair advantage. Humans ensured fairness without imposing decisions, allowing the factions to reach consensus through their own understanding. Guided by clear principles, back on Earth, Hyan analyzed the data streams from the system. Conflict metrics showed a sharp decrease in potential escalation. Communication logs indicated that parties were actively coordinating to maintain agreements. The Council noted the effectiveness and carefully documented the process. DAMI, coordinated aid for citizens affected by the dispute. Relief supplies were distributed efficiently, with human oversight ensuring impartiality. Families returned safely to their homes. Communities began rebuilding trust, knowing that fairness was actively maintained. In the council chambers, discussion of human involvement continued. Some delegates argued that reliance on humans might become a crutch. Others acknowledged that the discipline and principles humans upheld had become a model for governance and conflict resolution. The debate was civil, cautious, and thoughtful. J attended in observer capacity. He did not speak unless asked. His role was to ensure transparency and fairness in the communication between humans and the Council. His presence reminded delegates that accountability mattered. Tay monitored fleet readiness. Exercises continued, not for aggression, but to maintain discipline and precision. Crew members understood that the greatest strength was in restraint. Every decision was deliberate, every action calculated, and every maneuver purposeful. Weeks later, the dispute was fully resolved. Agreements were honored. Trade routes reopened safely. Both factions publicly acknowledged the fairness of the human mediation. Stability returned. Beyond the immediate system, other regions observed the events. The ripple effect was clear. Systems that might have acted rashly now paused to consider the principles demonstrated by humanity: fairness, patience, accountability, and restraint. J and Era stood together, looking at the stars. The human fleet remained ready, engines warm but idle, a silent guardian of principle. They had returned, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as stewards of fairness, guiding through example rather than force. The galaxy is changing, Era said. Not because humans enforced it, but because everyone saw the results of their actions and choices. J nodded. Strength is not only in power. True strength is in restraint, in discipline, and in standing firm on principle. In the quiet of space, humanity's presence continued to shape the galaxy. Every conflict, every negotiation, every observation reinforced a lesson. Respect, accountability, and moral clarity were more effective than fear or coercion. The Council had learned, the systems had adapted, and humanity had quietly ensured that the galaxy understood the value of its principles. And through it all, humans moved deliberately, patiently, and wisely, ready for action when needed, but always guided by fairness and discipline. The quietest and strongest form of power in the universe. The galaxy had grown cautious, thoughtful, and observant since humanity's measured return. Systems once brimming with conflict now paused, recalculating the consequences of each decision. Human ships moved silently along established routes, visible but unobtrusive. A constant reminder that discipline and principle had power beyond. Firepower. J stood on the observation deck of the flagship, watching distant convoys coordinate with precise timing. Era joined him, noting the balance achieved between calm human oversight and the fragile independence of the various systems. They are learning, Era said softly. Leaders who once acted without thought are now careful, even hesitant. It is subtle, but it is real. J nodded. They see that strength is not only in military might. It is in restraint, in fairness, and in clarity of principle. Tay oversaw exerc ISIS in the outer sectors, training young officers to act only when invited. Every scenario emphasized diplomacy over aggression, observation over rash action. Officers learned to respect autonomy and to exercise power responsibly. Tay reminded them often that their greatest strength was in patience and discipline. In a far system, a local dispute flared between two mining colonies. The conflict was over rare minerals, and tensions threatened to escalate. The council debated intervention, cautious now because of human precedent. A formal request for human mediation was sent and received. Nari led a delegation to the system. Unlike the council fleets, her team arrived without fanfare. Ships remained in orbit, visible but distant. Officers approached negotiations with neutrality, emphasizing transparency and fairness. Their presence calmed both factions. Negotiators adjusted their tone, realizing that any false move would be noted by impartial observers. Dialogue began. Each proposal was carefully weighed, each concern addressed openly. Humans facilitated, ensuring both sides could act with confidence, knowing the agreements would be honored and monitored. Nothing was imposed. Solutions emerged through careful discussion. Back on Earth, Hyan analyzed live data from the system. Conflict indicators decreased steadily. Communications showed cooperation and progress. The Council documented outcomes, noting the effectiveness of human mediation without intervention or coercion. DAMI coordinated humanitarian support. Refugees and displaced citizens received aid quickly, distributed fairly under human supervision. Relief efforts were structured to maintain transparency and respect for local sovereignty. The Council observed closely. Some delegates feared over-reliance on humans. Others acknowledged that the discipline, patience, and fairness humans upheld provided a model for effective governance and conflict resolution. Debate was thoughtful and restrained, showing subtle signs of maturity. Jay attended the session as an observer. He spoke only when necessary to clarify principles and maintain accountability. His presence reminded all that actions, not just words, carried consequences. Tay monitored fleet readiness. Training continued to reinforce coordination and precision. Crews practiced restraint as much as technical skill. Every action was deliberate, every decision considered. Weeks later, the mining dispute concluded peacefully. Trade resumed, and both colonies publicly acknowledged the fairness of the human mediation. Stability returned to the region, and systems beyond observed the effect. The ripple of careful guidance extended far, demonstrating that influence through principle was stronger than coercion. Across the galaxy, systems began adjusting their own policies. Diplomacy emphasized transparency. Agreements were drafted openly. Local leaders acted cautiously, aware that any misstep could be observed and addressed by humans who valued fairness and accountability. And Era observed the human fleet from their station. Ships remained poised, engines ready but idle. They were silent guardians of principle, demonstrating strength without aggression. Their presence shaped behavior not through fear, but through respect. The galaxy is learning, Era said. Even those far from direct human influence are reconsidering how they act. Jay nodded. Strength is quiet. True power is in patience, fairness, and principle. Humans are showing that clearly. The Council continued to adapt, learning the value of transparency, accountability, and ethical action. Conflicts that might have erupted into violence now paused, analyzed carefully, and resolved through dialogue where possible. In this quiet but powerful way, humanity reinforced its ideals: restraint, fairness, and moral clarity. Ships waited in orbit, ready to act if invited, demonstrating that influence through principle could stabilize a galaxy far more effectively than force alone. The lesson spread slowly, steadily, and imperceptibly, teaching that patience, discipline, and adherence to principle were the strongest forms of power in the universe. And humanity, quietly vigilant, remained the measure against which all actions were now judged.